Greetings, fellow humans. Welcome back to another episode of the Mental Health Show, presented to you by Youth for Mental Health. I'm your host Sifat, and I'll be taking up all the questions and insights that you have shared with us. Today, I'm very glad that we have a very fine soul with us. She is a developmental psychologist and very closely works with children and adolescents having developmental delays and differences like autism, ADHD, specific learning disability, and some other sensitive topics. She always keeps in mind the social-emotional problems a child can go through. Also, she works with a multimodal intervention approach involving stories, play, art, talking, and everything else that a child can connect to. Well, I'd like to introduce the very amazing Aditi Sharma. Hi Aditi, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you. Well, so we understand that you work with children and that requires a lot of sensitization. So, how do you manage that?
I think with everyone and of course with children, when we talk about interaction, I try to connect with kids based on, for example, when a child walks into a room and I happen to be with them, it's my responsibility to see what all in the room are they engaging with. And once I get to know that, I try to enter that interaction myself. And yes, you're right. When it comes to children and really young ones too, we need to be sensitive and also patient with them. But I think why that also becomes important is children have their own way of communicating. They have their own way of expressing what they like, what they don't like. And it becomes really important for us to understand that. And I think once you do that, it becomes easier, and doesn't seem so difficult. So I think I just rely on that.
Well, I think the children must be having a great time with someone who is so concerned about them. So we asked our Instagram community to give us some questions regarding your field. So we have some questions for you. So are you excited to take those questions?
Sure.
So Aditi, my first question to you is, how would you in simple terms define autism spectrum disorder?
Right. So autism is becoming a very popular word, and people get to hear about it but not understand it too much. And I think it's understanding in especially our country still developing. So if I have to explain it in simple terms, autism is a neurodevelopmental disorder, and if you break it down, neuro stands for the way your brain is wired, how connections are being made, and developmental stands for it tends to affect a person's development across different domains. So, say language, emotional, motor, cognitive, all of that. So, this is what it stands for.
I would also like to know, and what does spectrum signifies here?
Right. So to go into spectrum, we can also talk a little about what involves, like what actually autism means. So when we say autism, we should also talk a little bit about the typical brain development, because I've mentioned that it's related to how the connections are being formed. So if you imagine that our brain has different parts, imagine there is a language circuit which affects how we're able to use our language. There is an emotional circuit which influences how we're processing emotions, how we're expressing them. There is a motor circuit. So in a typical developing child, all of these are formed together, if I can say. So you imagine a 2-year-old, they're starting to walk, they're starting to talk, they're starting to make sense of the world around them, and this happens together. In autism, it's different because all these circuits are not working together, they're not interrelated, and some of them tend to be stronger than the others. So generally, if we try to understand children, we can say that from young age, in fact from the moment they're born, children tend to have inclination towards social experiences, towards connecting to others. So you'll see a very young child looking at you, smiling at you. If you smile at them, they'll return their smile, or crying very loudly to get their parents' attention. and that's how they interact. And of course, as the child grows up, they're connecting to people around them, they're talking, they're playing with others. So there's a very important social interaction that's happening in their life. But when we talk about autism, the development is different. Why? Because more than the social experiences, the child is wired to be more interested in more of sensory experiences and interactions with object. So you'll see a lot of kids who are on the spectrum. When you look at them from outside, it appears that they're not aware of what's happening around them. They don't talk to people. They don't want to engage with people. It seems like they are in their bubble, if I can say. So inside the bubble, they'll be playing with objects. They'll be sometimes they'll be talking about things, but they won't be doing this with other people. So the social element is missing. So this is what usually happens. And of course, when I said sensory experiences, the sensory profile of the child, of what's happening in their body, how are they responding to the sensory inputs in terms of sounds, in terms of movements, touch, and how are they processing it and how they're responding to it, that's also different. So when we say simply, if you try to understand that in autism, the social interaction and understanding and the sensory function of the body is different. But this is a simple way of understanding it. Of course, it's important. But when we say spectrum, it also means that if you have seen one child with autism, you've only seen one child with autism. So you may say that, the child will have certain social difficulties, but what do they actually manifest as? That is very different in each child. So and you'll see a lot of people who work in the field try to promote that, because otherwise we tend to stick with labels and we tend to put them in a specific category, but that doesn't usually help, because we need to keep reminding ourselves it's a spectrum. The child can be anywhere in that spectrum. So it's very important to understand their profile, which is the concerns and difficulties, rather than just the diagnosis.
Well, what you just said, as a psychology student, this was very informative for me as well, because I would not be able to explain this if I would not have met you. Coming to the next question, what are some interventions for autism, especially early interventions, and what does these interventions involve?
Okay, so like I said, that autism is becoming really popular, and of course, there's a lot of research that's going on, and people are finding new things, and that's very helpful. So you'll come across a lot of interventions and a lot of methods, which are trying to work around it. So I think I might not be able to comment on all of them, because it's a plethora of interventions, but I can definitely talk about what I use in my own practice. So at Children First, where I work, it really, what are we going to intervene with depends on how are we looking at autism or the child. And in fact, for us, it's the child more than the label of autism. So just like, let's go back a little and think about that. We're saying here is a child who is wired to not look at other people around them, or to not be interested in talking to other people. For them, their toys or, the things that they like or the objects around them is more fun. So they will connect to that. So now you say that, okay, we need to intervene. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to work almost against natural wiring. And that is why you'll hear people say that autism is not curable, because it's not a disease. It's not something that you catch. It's the way you are. You are born. It's the way you're making sense of the world, and it's different from the typical or the usually people around you. So in terms of intervention, the approach that we follow is that, yes, if you're going to say that we need to work against the natural wiring, we have to go into details of it, and we're saying that this child is not socially motivated. So, and my goal is to know, I want my child to look at others, play with other kids. If he or she is playing with a ball, they should be able to play a catch-catch game with other kids. Why not? So this is the goal that we want to achieve, but the basic step which we go forward with is trying to develop the intent within the child. Now, this child wants to play with just the ball. The child doesn't want to play with you and the ball. Now, if you want that to happen, you need to make this interaction with me, child, and the ball so fun, so much fun that the child is going to keep coming back again and again and again. So, that is why, that is how you will work on the social intent and how we do it. And, like I think I also mentioned earlier that if I see, for example, if there's a child who's playing with the ball, and I want that, no, I want this child to also register me in the room. I want this child to be aware that I am here so that they can use me as their play partner, because that's what social world means. Social world means recognizing other people around you, acknowledging them, and then having an interaction. Sometimes you can have fun with them, play with them, talk to them, learn from them, uh, talk to them about your problems, because you realize that other people around you can help you in things like that. So it's the motivation to engage with people that I'm going to go and work with this child. So like I said that, if there is a ball and if there's a child, if I try to say, no, no, look at me, play with me, that's not going to help. So what I need to do is that I need to enter into this interaction and make this game a lot of fun for the child to realize that, okay, I love playing with the ball, but I also love when she comes in and I make a game with her and the ball. So that's the intent. And with intervention, and like you said that we use a lot of play, for example, because play is a natural way in which everybody connects to each other, and that's the primary occupation for the child. Children play, right? Like fish swim, children play. So you need to connect with them that way. So that is what intervention means, that rather than skills that talk to them, do this, it's more about the motivation, because once you start that, once you fire that one circuit in the brain, the child realizes, oh, this is fun, they would want to do it again. And that's how it will become stronger and stronger. And then you add more nuances to it, and then the therapy goes on. That's, of course, that's very detailed, but this is the basis of it. That you make it so you make it fun for them to look at people and interact with them. And how are you going to do it? You're going to do it through play and, of course, other things. But this is why we usually use a lot of play. So you also asked me about early intervention. What it simply means is intervening at an early stage, because we're talking about the brain, we're talking about brain connections, and now research has told us that say from 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, these years of human development are the foundational years. At this point, child learns the fastest, and when you're trying to say that, I'm going to fire different circuits, it becomes easier, and the technical term for this is neuroplasticity. The chances of child developing these skills and these circuits connecting and reconnecting, becoming stronger, is very high at early age. So that is why you'll see a lot of stress being given on early intervention.
Yeah, I totally understand. And after all of this, I just think that on your part, it requires a lot of understanding and a lot of brainstorming as well. So coming to our next question, everybody looks at the cons of the mental health and mental disorders, but there are pros as well. Do you agree with this? And if you do, then how would you try to explain it to us and to our audience?
Of course, why? Because I think when it comes to mental disorders, people try to limit an individual's identity to that label or the diagnosis, that, okay, depressed person, anxious person, autistic person. But what we're trying to say here is that the person is more than their diagnosis. There are other aspects of their being, right? So in fact, because we're talking about autism, and of course there are a lot of different difficulties, in fact, that people on the spectrum have to face, but that does not mean that they're not any strengths. In fact, in my work, I've seen kids who have amazing talent in, say, music, in painting and sports and so much. For example, there was a child who was on the autism spectrum, and but he had a lot of interest in birds, so he just had to see one picture of a bird, and he would tell you the name, the migratory pattern, the life cycle, and I don't know what all. So, it's really important for us to know that the difficulties of the diagnosis is a part, but not the whole person.
Yeah, and it totally depends on how we treat the other person and what we feed them. Of course, it does. So, coming to the next question, do you think the working status of the parents affects the mental development of the child?
Um, Definitely. In fact, it's just like how you and I would get affected, from the situation around us, what's happening around us, and how are people responding to us, what are we learning from the environment. It's just that when we say mental health of a child, of course, a lot comes into it. Uh, Definitely, because for the child, a very safe space, the most safe space emotionally, physically, is the home, and that's the first place the child, starts learning at. So, of course, if it's an environment where the needs of the child are not being fulfilled, or they're getting some sort of messages where their ideas are being formed about the world, that this is what the world looks like. So imagine the house is a small picture which is a representation of what the world might be. So definitely, and that is why you'll hear a lot of research being done on, say, topics of attachment, of healthy relationships, of parenting, because of course it's important for the child how they share the relationship they share with parents, but it's also equally important for the parents, right? Even they need to feel um, emotionally safe and connected to the child in order to then go anywhere from there when it's learning, having fun, all of that.
Yeah, and I think parents' care is very important since younger children pick up very easily and very soon from their parents. So, Aditi, at last, I would like to question that how can we be more inclusive and sensitive towards children with special needs in general?
Right. I think when people try to think about this, and of course they're doing it with very good intention, but sometimes it feels like a pressure. Okay, what do we need to do? How do we need to behave? I shouldn't say anything negative. I shouldn't say something which upsets the parent or the child. But you know what? It's not that difficult, if I can just be honest. The basic thing is just go with your intent. If you want to be with the child, just keep that in your mind. And I think respect towards the family, and what I initially shared, just connecting to the child. You don't need to know anything about their diagnosis, or their what's happening at home, what kind of intervention the child is having. That doesn't matter. If you want to engage with the child, just look at the child, just see what he or she is engaging with, and just join in. So I would just say, joining in, that's I mean, that informs my therapy. That's what I do every day with all the kids I work with. Just join in with your intention of truly connecting with them, and it'll just go from there. It's not that difficult.
Or simply be as fun as Aditi is with her
Maybe.
children. Well, Aditi, it was great to have you here and have an insight into a world which is not perfect but yet beautiful. So I'd like to say that it was another episode wrapped up with unwrapping some myths and many insights. So if you have any more questions or queries, you can contact Aditi at her email ID, which is aditi.sharma@childrensfirstindia.com. If you like this episode, do give it a thumbs up and share, and do subscribe to our channel. Well, I'd like to ask, how do you work, and would you like to tell something about your organization, Children First India?
Right. So Children First is a mental health clinic for children, adolescents, and young individuals. And there's a lot of clinical work that happens. There's a lot of assessments that happens, consultations, and a very specific and important part of Children First is the developmental center, with which I'm closely attached with. We, like you had initially said, that we work with a lot of kids who come with developmental delays and differences, like you mentioned earlier. So, a lot of our work is based on what I talked about, how we use play and art as mediums of expressions. And and in fact, if you want to know more, I would say you can log on to the Children First website, or if you want to know more about, say, autism or the kind of intervention we do, you can also log on to the YouTube channel, and hopefully those videos will also help you, like this one.
Sure. Thank you so much. Until next time, I'm Sifat. Bye-bye.